So we're going to talk about the little blocks today, the little flower blocks that make up the border and that are scattered in the center. We've had some questions about how these get assembled and why you are cutting out more components than you need to stitch each month. So I'm going to go through month by month, starting with month number 1, and just see how these may get assembled over the course of time. So let's start with block number 1. So back in month number 1, this represents what you were asked to cut out of each of the fabrics. Singles, bottoms, tops, large centers, and small centers. So that's everything that you were asked to cut out of freezer paper and then cut out of your fabric. But under stitching, it says to assemble your block number 1, and then to just stitch 1 single flower and 2 bottoms. So that's exactly what this represents. 1 single and 2 bottoms. So I'm going to show you how we do those. So because this is going to get used over and over again, I actually used the thicker vellum paper to make my tracings of the small single flower, which shows the small and large center, and the top of the double flower, and the bottom of the double flower. So when I take my 8.5 by 8.5 inch square, I put my stabilizer on the back. Remember, it was going to be a little bit smaller, but big enough to cover the flower area. So I center my tracing paper of my single flower right on the center of this 8.5 by 8.5 inch square. Slid the single flower underneath, glued it down, and now I'm going to take off the freezer paper and I'm going to stitch it. And I'm just going to set it aside because under stitch it just says to stitch 1 single flower. It doesn't say to put any centers on yet, it just says to do the single flower. So it's the same for the bottoms. So for this bottom, should I turn it upside down? I centered it, put my bottom on, glued it, stitched it, ready to go, set it aside. And then here's my second of the 2 bottoms that I needed to do. So it doesn't matter which ones you choose to do, it just says 2. And I was vague in the pattern writing on purpose so that you can choose which pieces you want to use. So centered, glued, remove the freezer paper, and stitch. I'm going to set this aside for when something says to put a top on. The rest of these components will be used later in future blocks. Alright, let's look at block number 2. Okay, so for block number 2, here are all the components, small flower components. And it says to stitch 2 single flowers. So here's a single and here's a single. So we stitch those. And then it says to stitch 2 bottoms. So there's 1 bottom that's from the fabric of block number 2. But I decided that I was going to use this background, but the bottom flower from block number 1. That was the beauty of why we decided to do it this way. So that each month, those fabrics aren't just only associated with each other. That you can mix and match month to month, add different tops and different bottoms, but do little pieces as you go along. So this month it just says 2 single flowers and 2 bottoms, leaving it vague so that you can choose which of the flower components that you have cut out you want to put together. Let's look at block number 3. Alright, so here is block number 3. And not to get you too confused, we're just going to go through it the best I can. So it says 2 single flowers and 2 bottom flowers. So here's a single which is a flower from this month and the background from this month. Here's a bottom, flower from this month, background from this month. Here's another bottom. The background is from block number 3, but this bottom flower is going to be from block number 1. And here's a single background from block number 3, which is the block we're working on, but the single flower will be from block number 2. It's just something I picked randomly. It doesn't matter. It also suggests that you can start to add centers and tops to any of the bottom components that you've already assembled. So you have a lot of components now that you can start to put some centers on. If you choose, start adding some doubles, singles, starting to mix and match. That was the whole idea, that you now had different fabrics that could come together to make these flowers. So let's look at block number 4. Okay, so for block number 4, it says 3 single flowers, which are these 3 single flowers here. They are the fabric and the background of the month number 4. But for the 2 bottom flowers that it suggests, I just picked a random background and a random bottom, another random background and another random bottom. So they're from different months maybe. Again, in an attempt to get all of the fabrics all mixed up together so that the whole quilt looks like it all belongs together. It also says to add centers and tops to a few of the blocks as desired. Again, we left it vague just so you could mix and match and make the flowers look the way that you like. Now let's do block number 5 because it's cut out and then you can at least see it. Alright, so here are some of the fabrics that we worked on for block number 5. This is the background of block number 5. So I decided I'm going to use these 3 background blocks, and I just chose randomly one from block number 1 and one from block number 4. And then I'm just going to go through and see what it says. 2 single flowers. So I'm just going to randomly choose a single flower. If I can find one. I kind of have the shapes memorized now. And I'm just going to put it on here and get that glued and stitched, and then maybe put some centers on it. And then I'm going to start looking through these and start putting some tops onto some of my bottoms. That's what else I'm going to do this month. And then I'm going to add some centers. So at least I'm moving right along with all of the components of these little flowers. So I'm not stuck at the end with having to assemble everything at the end. So here's the top. I'm just going to fit this under. Sometimes I try to figure out what it looks like first and then get it lined up. So I think I'm going to put this top onto that bottom, get that glued and stitched, and maybe add a center or 2 to that. So that's what I'm going to do this month. So that's how you assemble the little flowers. At the end, you will have quite a few little flowers to work on. I like to think that that maybe would be month number 10 or 11, depending on if you want to do the inner border first or you want to continue to get all of your stitching done before you start to assemble the inner border. Well, I hope that was helpful in learning how to assemble all the little blocks. I know it's been a while since we began this process of this block of the month, but I thought now was a really good time to talk about the little flowers and what we were thinking when we were putting this whole project together. We like the fact that the little flowers can give your quilt its own personality so that every quilt that is being made isn't exactly the same or exactly like ours. So we did leave it vague so that you could put your combinations together. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we're hoping that you're really enjoying the process of putting together Full Bloom. and we'll see you back here for the next video.